All right, first question I wanted to ask you is the video of George Floyd. That really was the tipping point for the
Right.
beginning of all this. Your thoughts and feelings as you watched that video.
Yeah, well, it was hard to watch, both as a human being, but especially as a police officer. Uh, there was no way to excuse what happened there. That was not a technique that was being used to take him into custody. He was already in custody. He was handcuffed. There was no justification for what happened. And I looked at that as not just a police officer who's tarnishing everyone's badge, but as just a mean-spirited person that put his knee on on George's neck and killed him. And it's tough to watch, especially someone in my profession watching another police officer do something like that, and then to see officers surrounding him not taking action to stop it.
Did that surprise you?
It
that
did
no
surprise me. Now I have learned that a couple of them are very young rookie cops, but that's still not an excuse. I hope that we teach in the academy, if you see something like that, you've got to take action. You've got to stop misbehavior like that.
Let's talk about the protesters, because this really was, again, what started all of this. Do you understand the frustration of the protesters, the mistrust or distrust of police to a certain extent by these protesters?
Sure, I do, and I think we welcome peaceful protest. They have every reason to be upset, and they have every right to protest. And what we did here in J-Town is facilitate peaceful protest. We worked with a couple of different groups to help close a street down, and we made it very clear we're here. We're going to block traffic. We're going to help you make a statement, but we cannot and will not tolerate looting, breaking windows, criminal activity. And the people we were talking with were very receptive to that. They actually welcomed our participation. And I think that's the way it should be done. But yeah, I understand why people are upset and why people are protesting. And I hope that we come through this and take some of the things that have happened and make them better. I mean, we need to improve upon policing. And you know me, I'm a cop's cop. And 98% of our cops do a tremendous job and are there to serve and protect. But we need to do a better job of weeding out that 2% that doesn't. And that, a lot of that has to do with training, recruitment, retention, changing a culture. But yeah, we need to make some changes and improve our system. So I hope that when we get through this, it's going to be tough during the interim, but we all come out better.
Let's talk about that when you say you're a cop's cop, because some people might go on and I hate to them against us, because if we're ever going to get past it, it shouldn't be. But with that, then people might say, are you receptive and open to criticism and change to be better?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm 4 generations of law enforcement in my family, and I take the profession very seriously. I'm very proud of the profession. I'm not proud of some of the things I see happening, and I'm one that thinks we need to take a profession that I love and make it better. And there is room for improvement. We need to do better. And I think as a policeman, as a cop at heart, it hurts me when I see some of these things that are going on, and I know that we have to do better when it comes to policing our own, that 2% that gives us all a bad name. So yeah, I don't think having a cop's heart is a bad thing if that cop is doing what is right.
Let's talk about the way forward. How do we bridge this gap now because so much of it is us and them, or the two sides. But one thing that you said is that you can be a protester and also be all right with police, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't
sure.
have to be either or. So let's talk about the way forward. If you could, have main points about how we're going to bridge this gap, what are those points that you would talk about? You had mentioned certain things with training. chokeholds, things like that we've seen, knee on the neck. You said that shouldn't even be done, right? So
Yeah.
where is our common ground here?
Well, I think right now we're at just a tipping point, and we have to accept and get through these protests. But then after the protest is when we need to sit down and listen to the community and for them to tell us what they perceive as bad behavior by cops. And we need to take what they tell us and show them some of the difficulties we have being police officers and say, where's the middle ground? What I like to do is we set up these scenarios where we have videos playing and we have to make split-second decisions. I have invited media in to participate. I would like to invite community members in and say, okay, now let's roll it back. And in this case, we did this or we did that. What can we do differently that maybe will have a different outcome? But I think that it's important that when the protests are over, we have to sit down, and not just for a week or for a month, continuously. And that's why I'm not opposed to a civilian review board. I think that's fine as long as you have police officers on that board to give their perspective of what they see as a police officer. That would be like me trying to second guess a surgeon for a mistake he or she may have made. I think you need to have civilians involved in that dialogue. They need to be at the table, but there needs to be police officers there to actually tell them what it's like to have to face that scenario.
Let's go one step further with that, especially when it comes to African Americans and Black Lives Matter. I mean, that seems to be the biggest schism in this. And many pointing the finger at police, saying that the culture and the race culture and a little bit of, white supremacy is even used in all of this. How do you address that?
Well, I think that we do bring biases to this job. I don't believe every cop out there wearing a badge is a racist. I just don't believe that. But they do have biases. So what we need to do is have additional training on what we do when we respond, keeping those biases in mind. So I do believe that's the case. But I also think the police department has to be a reflection of the community. And in the west end of Louisville, it's mostly African American. We need more African American police officers, but that's difficult when it's really hard to hire minorities. Right now, we have police officers bailing out of this profession. And when we go out and recruit, it's hard for us to go and say, well, here's what we're going to give you. Okay, we're going to give you weekends, holidays worked, missing your kid's birthday party. We're not going to pay you much, and we're not going to give you many benefits, and we're going to now not promise you a retirement. So it's hard for us to recruit. And I think when it comes to our conversation about the culture, a lot of that I blame on recruiting and retention. We're not, in some cases, hiring the right people. And it's important that we hire the right people. But again, going back to those obstacles and trying to do that. And then when it comes to retention, I think one of our biggest problems is that our senior officers are leaving the department. They're either retiring if they're eligible, or they're coming to Jeffersontown or St. Matthews or somewhere else. And that's unfortunate because these young police officers need mentors. You know, we go to a 20-week academy and come out of that thing still a rookie and not knowing how to be a good police officer. And it takes a senior officer with experience to mentor them. And the analogy I use is my Miami Dolphins. They have to have a tremendous coach. But without an offense and a defensive captain, that coach is not going to be successful. You have to have people on the playing field that are keeping others in line and pointing the direction that they should go. And I really think that's what we're lacking right now is senior mentors to help these youngsters become better police officers.
You're the second person who has been in power who has said that. So when you have the right people in the right places, then That obviously helps because you've talked about that with mentors and everything. And keeping people in line because, now they have, I know in Louisville it was the duty to intervene. That might be tough if you're brand new on the force. I don't know if it is or not, but I guess that's my question with that. When you have those people, they're in the place to call people out. And you've done that before, I'm assuming. When you saw things,
Sure.
I'm guessing you've had to fire people before because you didn't think they were the right person, the right fit.
Right. And this new policy is nothing but words. You've got to have it in practice. You do have to change the culture and make it unacceptable to not intervene. You have to intervene when you see an officer doing what we saw in Minneapolis. You just have to do that. But that takes leadership. And you've got to have a leader that will say, you will be held accountable. We are going to maintain discipline. And if you don't intervene, then you're going to be dealt with. And that's not a policy. That's just something within the organization that has to happen. And I see in some cases, in the Minneapolis case is the perfect example where it's not happening. But I'm a big believer in leadership. You've got to have leadership that mandates accountability. And Bill Bratton was a good example of that when he went to New York. They were having all kinds of internal problems. And he sounded that message that we will not accept that kind of behavior. And we're not going to allow the 2% to tarnish the badge of the rest of us. And you will be held accountable.
Let's talk about the words that we keep hearing, guardian versus warrior. Your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one because I think we're guardians of our community. We're here to protect and serve. But you've also got to be prepared physically and mentally when the bell rings at the high school and you've got an active shooter. And then you want to be able to go tactical and be that of a warrior to go in and try to disarm or stop what's going on at that high school. I've responded to too many of these scenarios. I had to respond to Marshall County after their shooting. And you scratch your head and say, what could we have done differently? But, the Columbines, some of the heinous acts that we're seeing, you have to be prepared to respond to that. And you have to have a warrior mentality when you're doing that. But that's very rare in our profession. Most of the time we're guardians, but that's where it becomes difficult trying to train somebody to understand that you have to be both. But primarily I consider us guardians.
One thing that you had mentioned before to me is the different programs that you have and you think should be in place. We hear so much about defunding the police, but a lot of this is to go into social services. And you said mental health is a huge issue. Where police are called in and have to be in these tenuous situations. And that's one thing that you all have kind of done something about, right?
Yeah, we're real proud of that. And I don't believe in defunding the police, and I don't think most people are in favor of that. I think the polls show only 16% really believe we need to defund the police.
But you believe in reallocating.
But what I believe is we need to refund the police and put money in different places. But let the police officer be that triage to try to get that in motion. For instance, we respond, unfortunately, to a lot of mental health issues. And officers, they're not social workers. They're prepared to go in and try to stop the fighting and stop what's going on. But they need to be able to take that person to a professional. And that has to do with mental health. It has to do with child abuse. It has to do with domestic violence. It has to do with drug addiction. We're not trained to do that. We're trained to go in and stop the misbehavior that's going on at the time. We get calls all the time to come in and try to deal with mental health issues. And we have to be the one to respond. You can't send a social worker to the middle of a domestic dispute when someone is on drugs or alcohol or just mentally incapable of dealing with it. But we have to go in and triage it and calm it down. But then we need to have the tools to go to help us with that scenario. I'm really proud of what we did at the state police while I was commissioner. We hired a social worker for every post. There are 16 KSP posts. And we hired a social worker that the troopers could use to help them with child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health issues. That's what I think we need to do. We need to rebrand some of what we're doing, but that's just progressive policing. And we've done some of that here in J-Town. We were the first police department to start the Angel Initiative, where we invited addicted people into the station to help them get into treatment. When we started that here years ago, people looked at me like I was crazy. What do you mean we're inviting drug addicted people into the station?
But that's the heart of the community policing.
That's community policing, and that's what I talk about when I say we got to be progressive and think outside the box. We can't do it the way we did it 20 years ago because that doesn't work. So rather than defund policing, let's just encourage our police chiefs and our leaders to be progressive. How can we use that money more wisely?
Is there anybody that you talked about the Civilian Review Board, and I'm just wondering, do you all ever have any, maybe they're community forums, I don't know. Is there a way that you all get feedback from the public, especially the African American community, on ways to be better? Is that something that you all seek by any chance?
Absolutely. We did that my first tenure here as chief, and we started a community board that we met once a month, and we had all different walks of life come to these meetings. And it's refreshing to hear people tell you what you're doing well, but to tell you what you're not doing well. And as a police chief, as a leader, you've got to take that and incorporate it into your police department, because a lot of those ideas are wonderful ideas. And we like to think we're doing it right all the time, but we're not. We're doing it right a lot. And I'm proud of the men and women in uniform, but man, we can always improve upon our profession.
Let's talk about a couple of the things. I just wanted to go down the list here of different things. No-knock warrants, what you think about those?
I don't like no-knock warrants. I think they're dangerous for both the officer and the person that's inside. But I don't think you can completely outlaw them. There needs to be exceptions. I don't think you use them routinely on search warrants for drugs or evidence. What I think, and what we try to do here, is if we have a warrant for someone and it's a drug warrant, we'll wait for them to come out and take them outside and then take them back in. And then it's not a dynamic entry. It's just that person is taking you inside to collect what evidence you're looking for. But to completely do away with no-knock warrants, I think is not right. There are exceptions. Terrorism, kidnapping. If somebody has your child kidnapped and they're about to kill them, and a no-knock warrant's the only way you're going to get in, then you ought to have that ability to do that. But they should be only in very rare circumstances.
Egregious circumstances.
Yes.
that you're talking about there. Let's talk about chokeholds.
Mm-hmm. There's no reason to do a chokehold. But again, I want to make sure people understand that what happened in Minneapolis was not a chokehold. That was murder. I mean,
Make the distinction.
Yeah, you got to make that distinction. And oftentimes when police officers have to take physical control of somebody, it's not pretty. I mean, there's just nothing pretty about it. And police officers are not fighting for points. They're fighting to take control over somebody. But we just have too many tools on our belt that we can use that you don't have to use a chokehold. And the key to a lot of that, and we're blessed here in J-Town because we have professional, physically and mentally prepared officers that can do it without choking somebody.
Registry for bad cops.
Well, we started that. Well, I think that's been going on for some time nationally, but the FBI is not getting that information from everybody. But here in Kentucky, last year the Kentucky League of Cities, made up of police officers and civilians, decided we needed to have a registry, so we accredit or we give POP standards to those people that have successfully completed the academy, and we certify them as police officers. But just as important, more importantly probably, is we have to decertify bad cops. And I think the Explorer case in Louisville is a perfect example. Kenneth Betts is a criminal. Kenneth Betts is a sexual deviant, and he was allowed to resign and then go to another police department because they didn't know the background that case was going on. That's totally unacceptable. So what we have done here in Kentucky is when someone leaves a police department under a cloud or an investigation, that information has to be forwarded to the Kentucky Kentucky Law Enforcement Council, so that all police departments throughout the state know that person's background, and that has to be done.
And like you said, probably in every state that needs to be done.
And nationally,
Right, have that.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Because if you can just hop to a different department, that's crazy. That
And
wouldn't happen in anything.
Right, and that has to be done, and it's being talked about right now. But then you've got to have compliance. You know, all police agencies have to be compliant in doing it, or they can't get federal funding, or you've got to have some consequences if police departments don't do it.
Two things I want you to do. If you could say something directly to protesters, what would it be?
Let us help you. We know that this is a tough time for everybody, and they feel the need to protest, and they've got every right to do that as long as it's peaceful. And again, I think if you'll talk to the police agency and try to get them to understand your protest, and then you understand we have to have parameters, then I think that's the way to protest. But unfortunately, we have some people out there that aren't really protesting. They're just out there breaking windows and being bad people. And the police have to take control of that. We can't stand back and watch that go on. But the protesters, I want to make them know, most police officers that I deal with know they have every right to do that. And we will facilitate that like we have here in J-Town. And it's gone flawlessly here.
What would you say to police officers?
I would say, look, let's take a profession that we all love and make it better. We've got to do better. And when all this smoke settles, we've got to look at ourselves and say, what can we do to gain the trust of the community and not tarnish the badge of the 98% of the cops that I love and do a great job every day.
And I know, just to reiterate, your main points that you want to leave people with would be what?
I think professional policing has to be controlled from within. We have to control ourselves, and we have to do something with that 2% that's giving us a bad name. But I keep harping on recruitment and retention. We've got to hire the right people. If you hire a bunch of bad people, they're going to make bad police officers. So instead of defunding the police, we're going to have to put more money in policing. We're going to have better pay, better benefits to hire the best of the best. And then we're also going to have money to give the police officers the tools that they need to do their job. We're not mental health professionals. We're not addiction specialists. We're not child counselors. We need those tools in our toolbox. We need to triage, but we need to have help in people that are professional.
And if you had to do it all over again, would you be in law enforcement?
Yeah, I love law enforcement. I love my profession. And it hurts me when I see some of these things going on, because I know good cops. I know most of the people I work with want to do a good job. They want to protect and serve. But we've got to make this job attractive to those people that need to be police officers. Not somebody looking for a job, but somebody that really has the heart to be a good police officer. And we need to police our own. Have to do it.